Started, and welcome everyone to Carolina's presentation on the IFC performance standards, and this is part of her assignment 2 with respect to the certificate program, and we're so glad that you decided to do this, Carolina, so I'll pass it over to you. I'm going to pass you the ball so you can move the slides. I guess we didn't practice that, but if you have a question on how to do that, above the slides, now you have control. Just above the slides is a little box that says the first slide, performance standards, and then there's on each end there's a little arrow. Just click the arrow. Okay.
First of all, thanks everyone for coming and joining the webinar. I was a little nervous about this assignment, but then with the help of Wesley and Catherine, I managed to put a presentation, and I hope it is of your interest. I have to say that before I worked at the company that I am at right now, I didn't really know that this performance existed. And they have been around the company because we have international financing of the project of development banks. So a little bit about these performance, how did we get in touch with them at first, what they are, what the IFC is in like general matters. And then we can examples. So these are the things that I'm going to go through. What is the IFC and a little bit about our experience with the IFC performance standards. Then I want to talk about them. They can be implemented, and I'm going to give you some of the examples where they have been useful to our day-to-day work. I want to be able to let you know how practical they can be and how they have, why are they useful to us, because we have been able to manage to develop all of our corporate social responsibility program, take into account these performance standards. I'm just going to go in general to tell you what is the IFC. The IFC is a member of the World Bank. It's the largest global development institution focused exclusively on private sector in development countries. Then see the map of where the IFC has is working, and you can see that it is all of the countries that are in development, or third world countries, they have also been called. What the IFC does is it discloses some relevant project information, environmental and social implications, and expected development impact. What I mean is this: the IFC is very careful about the reputation of the projects that they get involved in. And in general, most of the banks do. So sometimes even when the IFC is not directly financing your project, most development banks will come to you and say you have to comply with the IFC performance standards. So we have a lot of banks that are not the IFC that request us to have to comply with these standards. And if you go to the page of the IFC, you will see they have a lot of they disclose a lot of information regarding environmental and social issues with the projects that they finance, and the issues that are around the IFC care about the reputation that they have regarding the environmental and social management of the different projects. The IFC and many of these development banks, but the IFC specializes in investing in markets that have potentially significant adverse environmental and social risks. There are countries that, as you know, present a lot of conflict, a lot of they have a lack of laws that can really protect the environment. They lack of many different regulations, and so the IFC sets the bar on what should be done. And this protects the environment, this protects the social and the community, but they also secure the projects and mitigate the risks that are environmental and social. So it has become a tool for those that are investing in these countries, in developing countries, because it kind of tells you how far can you go, and this is what they are so useful, because sometimes when you work in these countries, you are not completely certain about that, and that has to do with corruption, that has to do with the lack of laws, and sometimes the laws exist but they're not easily enforced. So IFC IFC sets a bar on where should you go and where shouldn't you go with the standards. Then corporations, that's what IFC stands for. Their principles can be easily implemented because they are based on performance, and we will see that when we go ahead in the presentation. They are process-oriented. They will let you know how you should be doing the work, how you should be put standards in work. They emphasize that all the projects need to meet the national legislation. This is something that is very important because if you comply with the IFC performance standards, that's not enough. Like most times in these countries, the performance standards will be more demanding than the local law, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to look at the local law and be sure that you're complying with it. So this is something very important for the performance standards. They also refer to relevant international agreements, and we will probably talk a little bit about that when we come to indigenous people, for example, because the IFC standard takes into account different agreements, international agreements that have to do with environmental and social agreements. It also puts the health issue at the center of it, which is really important because many times when people are investing in developing business in developing countries, you kind of put aside what human rights, and these tell you that the human rights is something that you should be protecting constantly, and will give you tools so you know that you're doing that. And we'll see that when we go into all of the standards. It will the projects that present social and environmental risks and impacts, which are most of the projects that you will, like, human activity will have social and environmental impacts. So these standards will help in any context that you are going to invest or any project that you are going to develop. Of course, the greater the project, the greater the risks, and then you will have the IFC performance standards being a little difficult to apply, but then, as I told you, they will give you on how you should do this. It's applicable to all projects and all activities, regardless of the source of financing. This is what you're about. You don't have to have IFC financing to be able to complete IFC performance standards. And many banks, practically all the banks that finance our projects, even if they are not the IFC, they will us in terms if we are compliant with the IFC performance standards. So this is helpful because it doesn't mean you have to be with the IFC or be financed by the IFC to be able or have access to this information. This information is public and anyone can have access. You can go to the IFC performance standard page. You just put Google and you'll have it will take to the IFC page, and there you will find a guide on how to use all of the performance standards. And today I'm going to talk about the 8 performance standards that you can see now on the screen, like the big umbrella on the performance standards. But each of these standards, and I'm going to go into the general aspects of each of them because we have the time to go on detail through all of them. But for each of these standards, you will find guides for specific industries. There is a guide specifically for wind farms that how to apply all of these standards in a wind farm, and that you will find for many of the more usual or the most usual industries that the IFC will finance. So this is really complete. This is a very wide work that has been done and really helpful for most companies. So what I recommend is after the presentation, you can search a little bit about the performance standards. We can relating it to your own industry, and you'll probably find very interesting and in constant revision. And that, for example, 2015 was the last time when they updated the guidance for wind farms, and included information that has been very useful for us because we're that. For example, they didn't specify the distance that the turbines should have to the receptors. In these new they do. For example, to do with noise of a wind farm, they regulated, they have guidance in these performance standards. So the industry, but you will have a lot of recommendations on the things that you should be, or when you should set the bar within the impact that your industry will have in social and environmental matters. The first performance standard is a standard that will go like through all of them, and it should not really like the first one, but it should be like a bar that covers them all. What this standard establishes is that you should do an assessment, a management system for all your environmental and social risks and impacts. So what you do to comply with this standard is identify the social environmental impacts that your industry might have, or that your project might be having in the community and in the environment. You have to identify if the other standards are triggered or not triggered. Like, for example, if I will go and invest in a project in wind farm in Panama, one of the things that this assessment will have me doing is investigating if we will have impact in indigenous people, for example. And don't then say that the performance standards regarding indigenous people is not going to be triggered. So I will not have to be doing any of the things that specific standard said that I have to be doing. But if, on the other hand, my assessment establishes that we are going to have an impact on indigenous people, then that performance standard is triggered, and then I will have to open the book and see what does this standard establishes that I should and should not be doing regarding indigenous people. So not all of the standards are triggered all of the time. That's what I'm trying to say. And the first standard, what tells you is you need to know what you are getting into. You need to know which of these standards you're going to be having to comply with in the development that you are on the project that you are developing. This also tells you that you should avoid and minimize adverse impacts on affected communities, and that's part of the assessment that you're doing. Like, if you're going to be, I use most of the examples with wind farms because that's what we aim for. But first, we're going to have a wind farm, and in my assessment, I identify a very important where birds migrate. Then, I will recommend that these specific turbines be moved a few meters away from that zone so that the bird can pass without turbines. That's an example of avoiding, and that's an example of the things that should be doing when you get there instead of after. And that's what this standard is for. Like, know what you're getting into, know what you need to avoid, and make a good assessment so that your project will have the less impact that it can have. This also promotes integrated social environmental performance through a management system. So all of our projects will have an environmental and social management system that will tell us like what are the guidelines on our projects and regarding social and regarding environmental. And this first assessment, this performance standard number 1, will also tell you about the community, how you should appropriately engage the community and do a proper stakeholder engagement. This standard will have specific recommendations on how you should manage the community and how you should do different meeting them and be able through the engagement of the stakeholders to understand the impact that your project will have in these stakeholders. So I'll tell you the last time we met about our stakeholder engagement system, that this is where it comes from. It can be complying with the IFC performance standards and what these standards say that we should be doing with the community to understand the impacts that we are going to have on them. Yeah. So as I said, this standard includes integrated assessments, which are assessments regarding social impact, environmental impact. It also tells you how to find the area of influence and addressing the impacts in the area of influence of your project. It has to do a lot with the stakeholders, and sometimes, for example, you might be having an influence in stakeholders stakeholders that are very far away because are impacting a river that will go further down into a community, for example. So though that community might be miles away from your project, that's an area of influence. And these are tips that these standards will begin you like aware of your surroundings, but not only what is immediate in them, but also far away. It also tells you should look for community impact. For example, now that we just built a wind farm in Tiraran, and that was like the 7th wind farm in that area, then we have to take into account what is going to happen with the birds now that we're putting these wind farms in a place where there are already some wind farms. What's going to happen with the noise, noise impact on neighbors now that we're putting these in a place where already are. And sometimes this represents a challenge because not all of the other companies might be there willing to share the information or care about these principles. Maybe they have international finance or development banks involved, so they don't really need to comply with this. But not only about compliance, this is also about mitigating your risks. And very helpful for us to be able to go and say, look, if we don't see what's happening, what we're provoking together, that we might have this community working against it. So let's just work it out. So it's been very useful not only to tell them you should comply because some don't have to comply, but also that they should carry the risks that might come. Some common issues like some problems to apply this or complying with this performance standard is that sometimes the environmental management system is not strong enough. Therefore, what this standard tells you, not only have the procedures, but have the people you need to put them to work. Like, for example, one of the things that always gets us the banks are very happy that we do is that we have a person in each of the sites in charge of implementing the stakeholder engagement system, and in general the social and environmental management system. So it's not about having the things in paper, but also being able to implement them, and having the resources have to do with this. And you're not able to really understand all of the potential impacts in the assessment process, and that is something that happens, and you have to be able to respond once you identify these potential impacts. But you should be able, to have at least the expert consultants that will let you know what your impacts are. And this requires funding, like for example, to be able to have someone that is an expert on birds and bats, that will let you know if you're going to have what is the prognosis of the impact that you might have on several species, for example. That is something that costs a lot of money, and most companies will not do that if the banks are not requiring them to. So that is something that's how these standards also meant to make you set the bar up, like what you should be doing. Sometimes decisions that don't adequately consider the stakeholder interests, and that is something that sometimes you have to take decisions that will maybe affect of the stakeholders, and there you have to mitigate this with having a very strong grievance mechanism and being able to listen to the different stakeholders. But it's very difficult. One thing is to listen to them, and the other thing is having your management team take decisions taking into account what they are saying. And that is an issue that you have to work through in order to comply with these standards. And sometimes monitoring that you do might be weak. That has to do also with the resources that you have to take in place to be able to implement this standard. For things that we do in this assessment when we are going to invest in a project is we identify and explain, for example, the social impacts. I wanted to tell you about this particular example that we have, and it's the noise issue that we have in Honduras. And here are some pictures of the way we usually work. As you can see, there's a turbine behind the house, and that most of the houses in that place where we have this park are very poor and have very poor infrastructure. So we do have a problem in the noise of the turbine getting into the houses, and people have some trouble sleeping. So we have developed a very very good noise monitoring system. And there you can see one of my coworkers making some noise measures. And we having an impact in the houses that are of the international standards established by the city. Then what we do is we improve the conditions of the house. Sometimes we have just putting windows or putting a door, proper door or a proper ceiling will be enough to get the impact. One of the things that we do also is that we communicate to people the impact that they might expect from our industry. So will come to us through the grievance mechanism and let us know what impacts we're having so that we can do the proper investigation and mitigate that impact. So when we do these assessments, for example, we did knew that this might be an issue of the distance that the houses are from the turbines. And when this project was built, there was no specific recommendation on distance. Now there is. And if it was built today, then it wouldn't be compliant because the distance is shorter. But when it was built, it was compliant because the norm didn't exist with a specific distance. So the IFC performance standards update, then you should adapt, and if you can, we can move the turbines now, but then we have to take other measures to be able to ensure that we are mitigating the impact that we have in the community. The second performance standards, and this is from now on, you're supposed to have already done the assessment, that's the performance standard 1, and identify if all of the following standards are going to be triggered or not in your project. I'm going to explain as if them were triggered, but not all the time, all of them should be a part of your environmental and social management system. That will depend. But most of the time, most of them are. There's an example, labor and working conditions. That is the standard 2. And what the standard do is it recognizes that the pursuit of economic growth through employment creation and income generation should be accompanied by the protection of the fundamental rights of the workers. So this standard will tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing in order to promote fair treatment of your workers, to include non-discrimination and equal opportunity. It establishes and maintains and improve worker management relationship. It urges you to promote compliance with national labor and employment and all of the law in the country that we are working on. Protects working, including vulnerable groups, and this is something very interesting that the IFC performance standards do, and it takes your attention into vulnerable groups. Like you don't only have to know you're complying with everything, but also be aware of the vulnerable groups that you have within each of the standards. And for example, migrant workers, they are a vulnerable group that the standard will tell you, be sure that you're complying also with the rights of these workers, because they are usually a population that might see their rights being violated by when it comes to labor and working. It also is very specific when it comes to children, when it comes to, and this system will also tell you how far should you be going on your supply chain. And this is one of the things that is very hard to comply with, because it gives you different recommendations, like when it comes to your direct contractors, what should you be looking at? When it comes to subcontractors, what should you be looking at? And when it comes to their suppliers, like what is the least thing that you should be doing? And sometimes what the IFC tells you is at least search and make sure that they don't have any big issues going on or in the internet, for example, that they're being accused of human rights violations or whatever. At least do a little research on what your supply chain is coming from. Sometimes if your recommendation will be as specific as that. But it also promotes a safe and healthy working conditions. And here you will also find very specific guides on health and safety regarding the working conditions of the project. You will see performance like a guidance on health and safety, very, very specific on what you should be doing. And there, for example, you will find specific regulations like do not charge your workers for the safety equipment that they have to use, for example. So when the banks come and they will go and audit one of our construction sites, they will be asking workers, have you been charged for the boots that you're wearing? Have you been charged for the helmet that you're wearing? And that will trigger like if you're complying or not with standards. Some issues is, for example, the workers' rights are not clearly documented or presented. When we are in operation, for example, it's very easy to be able to control all of this. But when we're building the windows, sometimes contractors and subcontractors and sub-subcontractors, and it's very hard to follow, like to be able to follow on every single thing. And we ourselves go and monitor what they're doing, so that when the banks come, we would have found the gaps first and be able to close those gaps. And what we found is that, for example, some of the workers have a written contract. They don't have a paper that says exactly how much they are being paid. They just get paid every 15 days or every week. Or, for example, the workers are not adequately trained on the safety hazards. That is a common issue also in construction, more usual than on operation sites. Sometimes limited knowledge of the child labor laws. That is also something that you have to be careful, so that you're complying with this standard. The example that I wanted to tell you about is that, for example, last year when we were having a construction here in Costa Rica, in Iberia, we went in the site and we were getting ready to an audit of the banks. So what we do is a few months earlier, we go and we see that everything is working. And it's very good because it's like when you have to comply with the banks and the next funding of the project that is being under construction is at stake, then you will be able to do things. And that's one of the good things that the IFC performance standards have. It's like, it be good, but also if you're not good, then you will have a serious issue going on. We find was that the temporary accommodation of the construction workers by one of the subcontractors, like in very, very bad conditions. Like you can see my feet in that picture. That's basically the space that they had, plus beds, and there were 4 people living there. And so when we find out, we call the contractor, we call the subcontractor, we ran non-compliance to them, and they had to rent houses in the community to re-accommodate those workers. I will have a lot to think that even though we didn't have the audit of the bank coming, we would have done this, but we did it because the audit was coming. So that's what I'm telling you about this IFC being like really, really effective, like to have things done. The performance standards also gives you very specific guidance on the resource efficiency and the pollution prevention, like what you should be and what you should not be doing. And what it does is it recognizes that when you increase economic activity and urbanization, it often generates an increased levels of pollution of the air, of the water, of the land. And you also consume a lot of the resources that are available in the world. So this standard, what tells you is avoid or minimize the adverse impacts that you have on human health and in the environment, and minimize the pollution that you will that your activity will provoke in the environment. What it promotes is to have a very sustainable use of the resources, including the energy and the water, and also urges you to reduce emissions that you are getting into the environment. And when you go to these performance standards on the specifics, you will see that it refers to the resource efficiency and gives you like specific recommendations on what you should and should not be doing about this. The greenhouse effect also as well. Water consumption, like where should you be, where be when it comes to water consumption, and so how to prevent pollution. Again, you will find a very specific guidance for each industry. Like for wind farms, what are the things that you should and should not be doing when it comes to resource efficiency and pollution prevention. Just regarding this the standard is, well, the contractors sometimes have different levels of training and awareness. Like not all, like you can be a company that is very, very conscious about sustainability, and you take a lot of care of how much energy you're using and how much material you're consuming. But their contractors will come and they will not have those same issues, or they will not manage that as well as you. So that is something that you should like be. Also, sometimes national regulations for emissions or for the discharges of water are not really strict and are lower than the international standards. And that is something that happens to us all the time. Like the national regulations, they don't exist, or they way lower than the international standards. So when you have your project being financed by the bank, then you have a very clear argument that I have to comply with international standards. But to a contractor, a subcontractor, sometimes it's hard to make them understand that they have to comply too. So you have to be sure, for example, that the compliance with the IFC performance standards are included in your contracts with them. And that we recently learned. But in the contract, there's no way you're going to be able to make some of the contractors and subcontractors come to these international standards, because sometimes it's very much higher than what they're used to. And that was a big battle that we had when it came to the temporary accommodation of the workers, for example. Like, but they said we're complying with the Costa Rican law, and we were like, yeah, but you're not complying with international standards. And if we had that on the contract, then probably we wouldn't be able to do what we did. That was that they had to move the workers from there. Also, sometimes there's limited competency of third parties to manage waste. We even have had the problem that to properly manage the waste, some of the countries don't even have like close to the project the installations or the infrastructure necessary for you to move those waste. So you have to take them far away, and that will increase your costs. And those, well, there you can see like most of the issues that are common to these performance standards. What we try to do to comply with this standard, especially when we are in operation, which is a lot like easier because it depends on us, is have a very proper waste management system, like with procedures, like very, very clear procedures established and what wastes should where, and have evidence that we're complying with the national legislation and with international standards. And what we do is we have permanent training of the teams and workers, like making them conscious on how dangerous it can be for to be dropped like anywhere, because we have sometimes we do have to work with very dangerous materials. So how they can dispose them, and if you go to any of our plants, you will see the hazard place like where they should go, and with all of the equipment and all of the teams, they know how to contain an oil leakage, for example, turbine, and how to make it less impact that they can have on the ground, for example, and how to remove, for example, the flora or the fauna if they are affected. So this is some examples of how we make this work in our company. Form Standard 4 is the community health, safety, and security, and this is the standard that has to do mostly with the community, the influence that you might have and the impact that you might have on communities around you. So what it does is it recognizes that the activities of the project, the infrastructure that you're bringing, the equipment that you're bringing can increase the exposure of the community to the different risks and impacts. And what it does is it urges you to address with responsibility and to avoid and minimize the risk or the impact that you might have. You anticipate and avoid those risks and impacts on the affected communities, and make sure that your security personnel is done in accordance. And this is something that is like become a very important issue in Latin America, especially that I know of. And this that sometimes companies will hire security personnel, and that security personnel will end up having conflict with the community. So you ensure that the people that are in your assets, especially if they have guns, they know like that they should use it only if their own lives are at risk, and that they engage into any report of a community, even though the community might be having a protest or whatever. So What we do is we make sure that all of our security personnel, like all of the companies that we hire to give us this service, will have proper human rights training for the personnel that will be at our sites. So this is very important because this is one of the issues that is having more problems in communities in Latin America. Like you can see the news where activists are being killed, and sometimes it happens when there are confrontation between security personnel and protests that are going on the community. This standard also helps you understand that you have direct and indirect impacts in the community and how to identify those impacts. And also let you understand that you can have negative impacts, but you can also have positive impacts. And how you have to try to make those positive impacts like them. And I wanted to share with you this photo that's school in Vietnam. And that is what happens when you build wind farms. Like you become part of the view on the communities, and that's how children in Tehran are drawing their community. Wind farm there, the turbines there. So what you want is that when people see these kinds of drawings and when they see the turbines, they are thinking it's a good thing that they came and not this too bad they came. So these positive impacts, we try to work them with the community, and we try to have a positive influence. We try to make our presence as positive as we can in the communities. When this standard talks about the health and the safety of the community, it's referring and it will give you very specific recommendations on the infrastructure and equipment into the community. The hazardous materials that you're bringing, like for example, if you have to dispose very dangerous materials, that might have an impact in the community. It also talks about the ecosystem services, like for example, if you are affecting park where the community usually sells tourist services, for example, then there you're having an impact in the economic that ecosystem gives to the community, and you should do something about that. It also talks about the community exposure to diseases, and these might happen especially during the construction phases because you will bring in people from out. This has an impact on the community. So what we usually do is we have interviews with local leaders to see if they're getting along with the construction work that are in the community. Sometimes you're bringing 100, 200 people in a community where 500 people, so that is a lot. And for example, then you have to train the workers also that they have to respect the community, that they have to respect how the community that they have to respect. For example, construction workers in Latin America it's very common that they don't respect when a woman is going in front of them, they will just say something to her that is not very respectful. And that is that we have to train the construction workers. Like if you're gonna be here, then you have to respect that we might go walking in front of you, and you should not be telling her anything, for example. Other kinds of things that you have to be aware of, and that the standards will help you be aware. Like be aware you're bringing people in the community, and that is going to have an impact. Be aware equipment in the community, and that is going to have an impact. Be aware bringing hazardous materials in the community, and that is going to have an impact. Be aware that your personnel in the community, and that might have an impact. And this is what this standard is about. The common issues have to do, especially in the construction phases of the project, that's where most of the issues are found. Also, for example, when you increase the traffic and the traffic accident risk, putting the turbines up to where we are building them, then we have to stop all of the traffic because these are huge components that have to go through very narrow streets. So we have to do a disclosure with meetings with all of the communities and let them know this time to this time the road is going to be closed. So please, if you have to leave, do it early or do it afterwards. And this is the amount of time that we're going to close the road. And then people will come and say, why don't you do this at night? And then you have to explain that because, for example, in Costa Rica, it is illegal to transport those huge components at night. like let them know why you're doing what you're doing, and keep a permanent dialogue with them. But know that that is an impact, like having the road closed for many for the hours that they have to go out to work or whatever is going to have an influence. And there you can see some of other common issues that we have. And what we try to do here with is some of the examples is we have safety talks in the communities, we do proper impact mitigation, we keep a permanent dialogue with the communities, and we inform them. There are always signs like what they should be or they shouldn't be doing around the project. And there you can see some of the pictures of the stuff we give in schools. Sometimes what we do is we bring school children into the park to let them know about safety. And the pictures of the house that you can see in this slide, that is us mitigating some noise in that house. So you can see how the house was at first. They took up the roof so that we can build a proper roof, but the house wasn't strong enough to support the new roof, so we had to build some new and for the basis of the house, and then we put the new roof, and then the noise of the turbines was no longer hear it inside of the house. So this is some of the impact mitigation regarding the health and the safety of the community that we are working on right now. Questions so far?
I'm not seeing any, but does anyone have a question? Would they like to raise their hand? Or I think, Elia said that she'd hoped she'd learn how the industry standards would help and or local people, and I think you're really touching upon all of those questions. So I think you have a question.
Okay, I'll just keep on going, and if someone has a question.
Okay.
There's also a standard regarding how you got the land that you are going to invest in, like acquisition and involuntary resettlement. And this standard is usually triggered when you have an involuntary resettlement, like when people don't choose to stay. But my experience is that it is also very useful, even if the resettlement is voluntary. That is the resettlement that we do. We have never not given the person the chance to stay. So what we do is we negotiate with them, like, we need your land. Will you be willing to go, and under what conditions? So what this standard does is that it recognizes that the project-related land acquisition and the restrictions on the land use can have adverse impacts on the community. And that is only if you have to move someone from their houses, but if you move someone from their farm, then you're not only affecting the waste, you're also affecting the economic activity that they have. So you have to be aware of this and know that if you are going to do this, you're going to properly compensate the people that you're affecting, that you will minimize the resettlement. That is like the first recommendation that the IFC tells you, like, then just don't use that land. Sometimes that is not an option. So you negotiate so that the person will go willingly. You have to also predict not only the social adverse impact that it will have, but the economic impact that a resettlement might have. What the IFC tells you is, at least you store. You should also improve the conditions that this person lives. Living conditions, the livelihood conditions, and the standards of living. And also the security among the displaced people. And as I was telling you, this standard refers not only to the physical displacement, but also the economic displacement. So we comply with this standard, even though we never have involuntary resettlement. And that has proven to be very helpful to know we're doing things right, to know that we are being able to take people to a place where they will feel better. And common issues regarding this standard is, for example, well, sometimes it's very hard to understand the economic impact that the displacement might have. Like, how do you quantify the effect that you're having in this person? Managing sometimes expectations of the compensation for the displaced individuals, because sometimes you'll be very clear that if you're going to build them a new house, it's going to be a new house that will have some of the same dimensions of the old house. Like you're not going to put them in a house going to be 10 times bigger the house that they live in, but it's better in some ways. But you have to manage those expectations very well. And define land ownership. We have this happen to us in Honduras. People don't have land titles. They have been in that land forever, and they have inherited that land from many generations, but have a document that tells you that they are the owners of this house. So what we had to do in Honduras is we had to work with the people and the local government in order to give title to land to more than 200 people. And that was expensive, and that is something that you have to have in your budget. Like you have to pay lawyers, you have to pay the registration of the land, and that is like very hard to do. And well, this is something that IFC is telling you. Like if you have to define the land ownership, you cannot just build in a place not properly owned by someone, and that person is not going to be properly compensated for that. So it's hard to track the individuals that you moved from place to another. And like for example, some companies will come and will give a family a lot of money so that they will go, and then the family will spend this money, I don't know, paying debts or whatever, and then they will end up homeless. For example, that is something that has happened. We do to prevent that is to build their houses when we displace anyone for the project, and I'm going to show you a little pictures later. And sometimes also it's very hard to track the individuals that went, like especially when you didn't build them the new house, they just went away. You don't really know the impact that it had on them because then you can no longer find them. There's issue that is very common. I have not experienced it myself, but some countries, the involuntary resettlement will be in the hands of the government, and then use all of the control on what's going on and how it's being done. So there is a common issue with this standard, and it's difficult a lot to know if you're compliant or not, because some government is the one that's going to just like displace the people. And what he says is if you don't have the control, then at least to monitor what's going on and compensate is something you know well, but sometimes it's very hard even to do that. Here are the examples of the houses that we've, of families that we've resettled in Honduras. Then you can see that the houses try to be similar to the ones where they were before, but they try to also improve the conditions where they lived. In Honduras, we did a resettlement for a total of 12 families that were, their houses were too close to the turbine, so we prefer them to be a little farther away. So what we did is we worked with them to identify where they wanted to live and a new land where they wanted to be, and we designed houses with them and let them know like what improvements they were going to have. Like for example, they were going to have windows and doors and better materials of construction, and some of them, well, all of them, we included a bathroom. They didn't have a bathroom before, and a proper stove also, because most of the stoves there are like they are contaminating all the house. So call them eco stoves in Honduras, and that's put a chimney and let the smoke go out of the house. So this is some of the things that we've done in resettlement, trying to comply with the performance standard number 5. Then there's performance standard number 6 that has to do with diversity and conservation and the management of living natural resources. What it does is it recognizes that protecting and conserving biodiversity, maintaining ecosystem services, and sustainably managing living natural resources is fundamental to the sustainable development. And it requires you to set out in this performance standard. It urges you to comply with the Convention on Biological Diversity. As I was telling you before, one of the good things that these standards have is that they are aligned with some of the international agreements, like very important ones, and this is one of them. And what this standard tells you is you have to protect the biodiversity around the project. You have to maintain the benefits of the ecosystem services I talked about this a little bit, but that has to do with the community and how the community uses these services and be able to compensate in them and try not to affect them. And we have to promote sustainable management of living natural resources, critical habitats. And this standard is very, very specific. Like, it gives you tools to understand what is a critical habitat, what is a natural habitat, what is biodiversity, what you should be looking for, and what you should be engaging in to comply with this standard. For example, when it comes to wind industry, we'll talk a lot about birds and bats and the impact that you might have on them, and how you should study the impact that you have and what measures you should be taking if your impact turns out to be an important impact. One issue is that most of the things that this standard establishes is not part of national requirements in most of the countries, at least in the development countries. And when it comes to biodiversity conservation, you will see that most Latin American countries, at least, that have knowledge of, the laws are very weak. Like, they don't, like, for example, no one here will legislate or will know how to legislate the impact that you can and cannot have in a bat population or in a bird population, for example. And then we apply the international standards. But again, if we didn't had willingly applied these standards, or if the banks didn't require to apply them, then you will have a lot of industries that don't have development bank financing that will not be complying with this, and will not be as sustainable as they should or they could be. Also, consulting the community. For example, when it comes to the ecosystem services, you have to consult the community and understand how this is going to impact them. Then sometimes this is very expensive, or you don't have the resources to do it. Well, also sometimes you do some weak diversity baselines on the assessment that you did as part of the performance standard 1. So that is going to be something that might be an issue. And well, there you can see some of the other comments that regard this standard. And here are some pictures of what we do to comply with this standard. We have a bird and bat mortality monitoring program that is very, very specific and very, very technical and very compliant with the IFC performance standards. We also have reforestation programs to restore habitats that we have had an impact during the construction phases. And all of our in all of our plants, we have people trained to do fauna relocation. Like, there you can see a guy with a snake, and that is a small one. Sometimes we have very big poisonous snakes living in our parks, and we do have people that is trained to them and relocate them. So having these people trained in those is one of the things that you should be doing to comply with this standard. This people is IFC standard number 7, and as I told you, sometimes this triggers and sometimes it doesn't, and that depends on where you are going to operate. Basically, what this standard does is it recognizes that indigenous people should have a special treatment, like they are more vulnerable than other groups, and they all have sorry, I read what Catherine put in that lost. What this standard recognizes that the indigenous people is a vulnerable group and should be treated accordingly. And what this standard tells you is you should be respecting their rights, their dignity, their aspirations, their culture, their livelihood, and their livelihood conditions. But you should respect their knowledge, their practices, and their culture. And if you see this standard and you know about the IOL 169 agreement, you will see that it's very aligned with what this international agreement says. It says that you should avoid an adverse impact in these groups, that you should support culturally appropriate benefits for them, that you build the relationships with them, and that you should have a free, prior, and informed consultation to give you consent, their consent to be there. And this is completely aligned with the IFC, with the in the people agreement. So or the other, again, what I was telling you about on how these standards are very aligned with international agreements as important as regarding indigenous people. Most common issues in Latin America is that companies and governments don't really know how to perform the free informed consultation. Like, they don't know who they should be asking, who is the legitimate leader of a group of indigenous people, and some companies with the best of the intentions end up doing a complete mess of a project because there was no proper consultation, because they didn't know how to do it. And that is something that the performance standards is beginning to tell you, but the truth is that the performance standards and the international agreements and the law legislation still lack of a clear thing on how you should be doing this consultation. So now we have some governments, for example, Mexico and in Peru, trying to develop some of the rules or the baselines and how this consultation should be done. But the truth is that it has not been really done. It's something very new, and any company that engages in that will be presented with very, very high social risks. Like, your project can be seriously delayed or even stopped if you affect an indigenous population and you the intentions of doing this consultation, but you don't do it right. So right now, this is one of the main social issues going on in all of the Latin American countries, for example, and that's something that we are very cautious about. Like, when we are going to invest in a new project, this is like the first thing that I will look into in my assessment and say, okay, if indigenous people are going to be affected, then you should consider a lot of time in the development phase just to know if this project is going to happen or not. And that requires funding, and that is expensive, and most people don't want to do it. So this is like a very, very critical issue right now in most Latin American countries. So some people don't know how to accurately communicate the impact that the project is going to have. Sometimes you have the language barrier. Sometimes you don't really consider all of the losses that they're going to have. And also the times of the industries are very different from the times of the indigenous people. Like, they don't really care if your project is going to be years delayed, care that you understand what they are doing, their culture, what the land means to them. And on the other hand, when you have people putting their money into this project, they are going to care a lot if the project is delayed 3, 4, 5 years. So this is something that I don't think is really fully resolved. It's just getting bigger and bigger, and I really hope that we can soon find some good examples on how this is properly done in America, because so far it hasn't really been completely implemented right. The last performance standard it has to do with cultural heritage. And what it does is it recognizes that cultural heritage is very important for future generations. It is consistent with the concerning the protection of the world's cultural and natural heritage. And what this standard does is it urges the investors, the clients, to protect cultural heritage and through all of the activities. So what they do is they protect. So the standard should be protecting cultural heritage and promote an equitable sharing of the benefits that the cultural heritage might have in the business activities. What this standard refers is to archaeological sites, monuments, historic architecture, churches, holy places, and arts and human burials. So this standard will also give you a definition of what an archaeological site is, what a monument is, and what is expected that you and what is expected is that you don't affect it. And if you have to build there, then with all of the permissions and consultations that you have previously done, you can remove it and put it somewhere else. And there, if it's in the best interest of the whole population. So this is like a very specific performance standards that also most of the time is not triggered. But for example, if you're going to invest in Mexico, in the south of Mexico, probably this is a standard that is going to be definitely triggered because you will find their cultural heritage all over. Some issues is that sometimes the destruction happens in place and that is irreplaceable, and that's not, there's like once it is destroyed, there is nothing that you can really do. Also, sometimes the value of the resources can be, and you don't really know what you are getting into. And this is part of the things that if you did a good competitive performance standard 1, and you did a good assessment, you will know if you're getting into a place that might have some cultural heritage, and some should be taken. For example, sometimes you have an archaeologist on site all the time during the construction phase, just to make sure that they will not destroy something that will be then later irreplaceable. Minor issues with the heritage. For example, we had to do an archaeological assessment in the area before we were given permission to build the wing there. And what happened was that an archaeologist had to make a hole every 10 meters to see what he will find. And what he determined was that was an area where indigenous people Mexico will pass through, but they didn't establish there, so there was no risk. And also we had to have a restoration plan in Choluteca. Some pieces and stones that were found had to be taken away, properly taken away before we started the construction process. And that's the experience that we've had to comply with this standard, but it's not in the places we've worked so far. It has not been that common. So these are the standards. They are very, as you can see, they are very useful. It's like a hand guide, and I have it in my desk all the time with a lot of post-its in it on the different standards that are triggered in the projects that I work at. And it's very handy, and that is something that is very useful of these standards. They are very, very handy. They will give very, very specific recommendations, and if you comply with these standards, the sustainability program of your project will be definitely more strong than you don't. Because if you, I hope that I was able to tell you that the message that I was sending is that these standards are very thoughtful about sustainability. They are very thoughtful about stakeholder engagement. They are very thoughtful about being able to develop industry in environments that will respect environmental and social impact you might have. So this has experience with this standard, and I really thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know.
That was terrific, Carolina. I have a couple of questions, and I'll see if anybody else has any. I know we've run over time a little bit, but you haven't lost a single soul. So people were riveted to your examples and your explanations. So thank you for that. Would you say these standards are aligned with ISO 26000, or what's the basis and the methodology by which they are continuously updated?
They align with the important international agreements, and they even will make specific references to those agreements. So they're pretty much like working together. And what they have is that they have working groups. The world has working groups that is constantly reviewing these performance standards and updating them. Like, for example, there was urging the standards to come with a specific distance on that for example, that the wind farms should have from the houses. During this, the standards will say you should have a setback, but they didn't say how long should that setback be. And that was something that was the issue more and more on the wind industry. And then in 2015, the new guidance came out. They had this included. So I think one of the things that makes this very effective is that they have people that know about the industries working on them. I continue there. It's people that will have the experience, that would have been on site, that know how the industry works, and make them realistic, because sometimes when you have like the academic sector working and then the industry sector working and they're apart from each other, sometimes what they want you to comply with is not realistic. It's not something that you like. It will be best if then you don't do the project at all, because it's going to be so expensive that it's not going to be worth it. And I think one of the good things that the performance center has is that they're very realistic, that they're very industry focused and make the industry be able to comply with sustainability, but without making it impossible to develop your business. And I think that is one of the things that makes this standard so useful.
And my second question was kind of related to that. Sometimes when you get very prescriptive standards, it becomes the new floor. So even though companies could do a little bit better, they don't because it's not required. Do you see that at all with standards, whereby the level of performance is actually pretty low in order to get there?
That is true, and that is a risk definitely with these standards. First, I want to say that the standards are high. Like, if you the industry sector in Latin America and you see the local legislation pointing to these standards is pointing high. So I prefer that is the case. Like, sometimes if you can do best, then you will stay there. But if you are doing less, then you have to get there. So I think if you put that in a balance, it's best that they work as they do. What you should do, and then that's where it comes like the specific companies invest, and then you will go to reputation. Like, for example, when we do things that are above the standard, we're putting the bar here. What we will come to say to our management team is we are in the example, and they will be very happy that we are setting the example. For example, we put some monkey. We had monkeys go to our transmission line in one of the projects, so we built some special like passes where the monkey will go from one side of the road to the other without passing through the transmission line, and that is something that wasn't really required by any standard, but we did it because we cared about the monkeys. And then when the person from the bank came, they were like, "You are setting the bar higher here, because that is awesome that you care that the monkeys have somewhere to cross here." So there you should like appeal to the conscience of each of the companies and the people that work there, and that you really are making this not only to comply, but also because you think it's right and because you care about the world and the concept you're working at. But don't care about that, like other companies that might not care as much as where I work about that, then at least they will have the least that they should be doing in order to get international finance. But definitely a risk to companies, and then what I appeal to is like, well, the reputation of your company and how to be avoided and setting the example.
That's terrific. I see a question here from Yen, and she's saying she's wondering if all the robust impact mitigation data is used as part of your CSR sustainability reporting. For example, is it available to the public, or is it only available to the IFC or the banks or the banks?
We include a lot of the things that we do in our sustainability report. Some information, though, that is confidential, like, for example, some of the results of the bad monitoring program. We do include how much monitoring we're doing, but in Latin America, most companies don't share that information, so we don't either. And what we say and what is public is that our results are under the industry. We're average, and it's the information that we share. But like very specific technical issues that are not included in the report, but are included in the bank's report. So we do have two different. One is a very technical report that goes to the bank, and the bank will create an environmental and social action plan where they tell you the gaps that they find and what you should be doing it, and the bank should be complying with that. And that is not public. That is something that is a work document that we develop with the banks, and that we publish sustainability report where we include include most of the information, but some very technical and specific information. It's on our website.
If you have any further questions about that, maybe you want to have that conversation offline with Carolina, because we're at 1:17. Is there a final question, or are we good at this point? And says, wonderful, thank you. Yes, Carolina, thank you so much. This was so amazing. I really, really appreciated this. And is it okay if I share a copy of the PDF of the presentation with everyone?
Yeah, please. Yes,
okay.
Please. And if you want any further information on any further discussion on any of these subjects, then just feel free to contact me through my email, or we can schedule a Skype call or something.
Terrific. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And again, Carolina, you knocked it out of the park. So great job.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.